Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel if you're new here. I hope you're all doing so well. Welcome back to another true crime and makeup episode. We are covering the case of Kenneth Erskine, who is also known as the Stockwell Strangler. He was a sadistic, horrific, awful human being, if we can even call him that. He would target the most vulnerable group in society, the elderly. Elderly men and elderly women who were in a vulnerable position. He would target them, he would sneak into their houses during the night, and he would proceed to murder and sexually assault each and every one of them. This is the most disgusting man that I think I'll ever have to talk about. I cannot believe what he did to these elderly people. It is just absolutely shocking. I know you will anyway, but please remember that these are people, these are people's family members, and they are so much more than their cause of death. And they were absolutely cheated out of the end of their life by this horrific man who just took it from them. Please don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. Put the notification bell on so you don't miss when I upload, which is every Wednesday and Sunday at the moment, and I'm hoping to increase that over time. But without any further rambling and any further ado, let's get into the case of the Stockwell Strangler. So, Kenneth Erskine, he was born on the 1st of July 1963 in Hammersmith, and he was born to a British mother and also an Antiguan father. He was one of 3 children, and unfortunately, at a very young age, he would be abandoned by his parents. Now, it is said that Kenneth and his siblings were in and out of different foster homes and different places throughout the foster care system. He did also wind up being placed in a variety of special schools, basically for his behaviour problems, but even at these special schools with staff trained to deal with children of his calibre, they still could not keep his behaviour under control. He was extremely aggressive and violent. Now, like I was saying, his behaviour and violence throughout his schools were so problematic that he was in and out of different schools to try and find teachers who could cope with his behaviour. And in one of these schools, they did go on like a field trip or like class trip, whatever you call it. And on this trip, he attempted to drown several of his peers, several of his classmates. He tried to drown them. Where's the teachers in this? Like, how is he even getting away with the first one? He attempted to drown several. When the first one wouldn't stay under, he went for another one. Like, hello? As time progressed, so did Erskine's violent behaviour. Like, it did not get better with time, it only in fact got worse. And at a very early age, Erskine had become homeless. Like, he had no money, no food, no necessities, and because he never had any necessities because he didn't have the money to buy them, he decided that, well, I need money, so I'm gonna just take money that I think I deserve, and he started to burglarise people. Yeah, because like morals and all that, you know? Also, I need to address what might be another elephant in the room this video. Is it burglary? Burglary? Or burglary? If I say it wrong, though, please just pretend I never. But yeah, what I was trying to say is he would rob people. That's so much easier. He would rob people, right? And with either the cash that he had or the cash that he would get from the stolen goods that he would sell, he was then using this to buy his version of the necessities. Not the necessities, you know? Now, with all the cash that he had made from his burglaries, from his robberies, he was able to open up several bank accounts. Now listen, I barely have money in my bank account to have one bank account, right? Sometimes I'm like, I should just shut that down. But he was able to open up several with the amount that he had gained. And he was eventually caught for this and he was sent to prison. He would go on to serve a little sentence in HM Prison Feltham. So you know how like some people go to prison, right? They've maybe done a few things wrong, but they're like, I want to get my life in the straight and narrow. So they spend their time in prison working on themselves, self-development. Yeah, Erskine had no desire to do that. Instead, It would seem like being in prison just motivated him to become even more of a sadistic criminal. It was like he sat in his cell fantasising about all the things that he would get up to when he's out of prison. And I don't mean like book a holiday to Ibiza or go away camping. He was just thinking about all the heinous atrocities that he was going to commit. Now, by the time that Erskine had left the prison, it would seem that he only had the absolute worst intentions imaginable, and he had planned to go on a murder spree. And he was going to kill some of the most vulnerable members of society. That was the elderly. Yeah, he was going to attack, murder, and sexually assault the elderly. So now I am going to do a bit of a fast forward to 1986, and we're going to discuss an elderly lady, and this was 78-year-old Nancy Eileen Ems. Now, Nancy Ems was a retired school teacher. She had absolutely loved her job, and she was now living on her own on West Hill Road. This was a suburb of Wandsworth, and it was located within southwest London. Now, I will say, Nancy, she was quite vulnerable. She had mild dementia, and a lot of the time this meant that she couldn't really care or look after herself in the way that she's required. She really struggled to make herself meals, and she also would forget to clean, and she would live in sort of a rundown environment, and she was on like the basement. She had like a basement flat, so she was on the ground floor. Now, when the council had sort of become aware of her condition and also her living conditions, they decided to get a home help in place who would visit her a couple of times per week, give the place a tidy up, and also cook her some meals. So on April the 9th, 1986, it is one of Nancy's scheduled home visits. So the home help enters her flat, apartment, whatever we want to call it, and she's shouting on Nancy. There's no response, so she goes into Nancy's bedroom to check on her, and tragically, Nancy was found dead in her bed. But when the home help had first seen Nancy, she was tucked up, she had like her covers pulled away up to her chin, and it looked like she had just passed away peacefully in her sleep. There was no signs of violence or foul play at first sight. Now, doctors would conclude by looking at Nancy's body that it was clear that she had passed away a few days earlier. They reckon it was 3 days prior to the home help finding her body. Now, her death was going to be ruled as natural causes, and her death certificate was updated to say cause of death, natural causes. Now, a few days before Nancy's cremation was scheduled, the home help noticed something really strange in Nancy's flat. She noticed that Nancy's television set was gone. The place looked just a bit more untidy than it normally would. So immediately the home help reports this to the police and says, listen, I'm quite suspicious. Suspicions are arising here. Something's not right. I would like this looked into. And luckily this stopped the cremation going ahead. Thank God. So they get a post-mortem carried out in Nancy's body, right? And I don't think they were expecting to find much, but what they would find was absolutely horrifying, and thank God this home help realised that something was wrong. Nancy had fractured ribs, she had a severely bruised upper and lower body, and she also had finger marks around her throat as if she had been strangled to death. Now, the pathologist had believed that Nancy had been attacked while she slept, and even more disturbingly, there was semen found on Nancy's body, and it would later be confirmed that Nancy was in fact raped after she had been killed. Now, once the attack and murder of Nancy had taken place, it was said that the killer had then rearranged her body and her bed to make it look like she had just went to sleep and not woken up. Like, this is insane. Now, they also figured out that the television set had been removed through a window that the killer had actually broken through. Nancy was known to be quite a hot sleeper, so she would often sleep with a window cracked open, especially when it was a bit hotter, and in this time there was a slight heat wave going on in the UK, so she had her windows open to let in a bit of a breeze. And honestly, like, this just breaks my heart, like, to target One of the most vulnerable groups in society being the elderly, and it's like they won't have the strength to fight you off. It's like, it's just so disgusting. How could you invoke that fear into someone? And especially when I think about Nancy and the confusion that she would have felt and the terror with her dementia, I can only imagine that would have heightened the horrible circumstance that she was already in. Now, forensic officers have been able to obtain a hair sample from the crime scene in Nancy's home. Now, they were able to determine from the hair sample that it did belong to someone of an Afro-Caribbean descent. At this point, forensics was in its infancy, so it was still really early days with forensics and just what they could do with it. It was nothing like it is today. So unfortunately, it didn't really bring up any leads. Now, police did go on to search their database for any known sex offenders or burglars in the southwest area. They were going through their database with a fine-tooth comb to try and turn something up. Now, police also decide that they're going to have a look and see if there's any other murders that have occurred that are very similar to what happened to Nancy Ems. Now, shockingly, they were able to uncover 2 murders that happened previously of 2 elderly men, and it very much matched what happened to Nancy Ems. So on May the 6th, 1986, 73-year-old Charles Quarrel was discovered dead in his bed at his home after being suffocated. There was also 70-year-old Wilfred Parks who had been found on the 28th of May, and devastatingly, he had been strangled in his bed as well. But with these 2 deaths alone, the police are thinking, this could be similar. It's 2 elderly men. Maybe they're just targeting elderly male and females, not just females. So they decide to go further back again, and this is where they discover 57-year-old John Jordan, who had been killed in the same manner. Now, despite there not really being any evidence per se that would link these crimes together, police believe that this could be the work of a serial killer in the area who is targeting the elderly. I mean, after all, the cause of death is all the same. So now we're going to focus our attention on 67-year-old widower and mother of 4, Janet Cockett. Now, Janet Cockett, she also owned a ground floor flat, and she only lived a few miles away from Nancy Ems, the first victim. Now, very similarly, Janet's death was also going to be ruled as natural causes. Like this guy. She was found tucked up in her bed, covers up to her chin, and she had looked like she had just passed away peacefully in her sleep, just like Nancy Ems did. Now, I don't know if it was at the request of the family or the police, but Janet Cockett would undergo a post-mortem, and this post-mortem would reveal that she had fractured ribs and severe bruising around her neck and had been strangled to death. Yeah, we've got a serial killer. Now, thankfully, Janet Cockett had no signs of sexual assault, so unlike Nancy Ems, she hadn't been raped, which, thank God. However, underneath the cover that was staged and tucked up to her chin, she was in fact naked, and it was said that the killer had torn off her dress and folded it neatly and lay it beside her bed. And like, this whole thing is devastating, but in my mind I was like, is the murderer Sheldon Cooper? Like, why are we folding the clothes? Weird. Now, this time, unlike the scene at Nancy Ems, any family photographs that were in Janet Cockett's flat, they had all been put face down or turned around to face the wall. I don't know if that's like a sign of guilt, like feeling like they're being watched and they don't want the family to see what they're doing to their loved one. I don't know. I'm not a killer, I'm not a psychopath, so I'm not sure. But maybe. Now, this time, police were able to get one single thumbprint off of a plant pot, and they were also able to get a clear palm print off the bedroom window, and they had concluded that the killer had come in through this bedroom window and had also exited through this bedroom window. They also reported that an elderly man, that very same evening that Janet Cockett had been killed, an elderly man's home was nearly broken into, but the killer had heard a loud noise and had basically fled the scene, ran away. Thank God that elderly man was okay. Now, the 2 cases were being looked into by 2 separate police stations, right? So the initial link of a serial killer, or that these crimes might be linked, wasn't found right away. However, I will say the police, they were communicating with each other at the separate stations, which is good, and they were running the thumbprint and the palm print through their database for any suspects, but at this time it wouldn't show anything up. And they did feel like Even though some of them had suspicions that it could be the same killer, there wasn't enough sufficient evidence to say verbatim that this is the same killer. Now, just 2 weeks later, a 73-year-old man by the name of Frederick Prentice would survive an encounter with Kenneth Erskine. Now, Frederick, he was a resident at an old people's home, so somewhere where he could be properly cared for, when he was awoken in the night. Now, Frederick was awoken during the night when he heard footsteps out in the hallway. This was loud enough to wake him up, and when he looked over at the frosted glass door, he seen this really dark shadow figure that then proceeded to enter the room, and it was Kenneth Erskine. Now, Erskine at this point was dressed in all dark clothing, so he couldn't really be seen properly, and when Frederick attempted to put the light on, Erskine came right over and silenced Frederick. Now, Frederick had reported that the intruder that came into his room was almost playing like a game with him as he attacked him. So he was like squeezing on his windpipe, then letting go, squeezing on his windpipe and letting go. And he would do this around 4 or 5 times. And luckily for Frederick, in this case, he was able to reach the panic button, and this brought a warden into his room within minutes. But by the time the warden got to Frederick's room, Erskine had already fled. Now, Frederick had said that when this intruder was trying to strangle him to death, he was hissing under his breath, "Kill, kill, kill, kill," over and over and over again. And Frederick had also said that he had the most deranged, sadistic look on his face, like this huge grin, like he was enjoying every single moment. Now, Frederick Prentice would go on to provide a description of the man who was in his room. Now, obviously, this is a horrific ordeal that he's just been through, so his memory of it all right now might not be at its best, but he was still able to give a very good description. Now, Frederick Prentice was able to confirm that the man in his room he thought was in his late teens to mid-20s. He had dark hair and he was also suntanned in complexion. Now, horrifically, on June the 28th, the killer would strike again, but this time he would take 2 victims in one evening. Now, on this night, Erskine would target an old people's home, and this was Somerville Hastings House, and this was located in Stockwell Park Crescent. So this night, the staff became extremely suspicious when they could hear the sound of an electric razor at 4 a.m. So they're concerned, obviously it's elderly patients that they have, they shouldn't be up at 4 a.m. So they want to go and check and make sure everyone's okay. Now, when they went to find where the noise was coming from, they were shocked when they seen a creepy, dark shadow figure lurking through the hallways. They immediately contacted the police and they went away to arm themselves, so they had something to defend themselves and their residents with. Now, when they had returned to, confront this intruder, devastatingly, they would find 2 male residents deceased. The first was 84-year-old Valentine Gleam, and the other was Zbigniew Stabrava. And apologies, I did have to say it really slow, but I kept tripping up on it, so I'm really sorry, and I probably said it wrong, and I do not mean any disrespect whatsoever. And horrifically, both of these elderly men, they had been strangled to death yet again, and both of them had been sexually assaulted. Now, the police believed by examining the scene that the killer had entered through Mr. Stabrava's window in his bathroom. He had like an ensuite type thing. And the noise of the electric shaver that they heard was in fact Kenneth Erskine giving himself a shave and having a wash in Mr. Stabrava's sink. The audacity of this man. Now, luckily, the night staff, they had got enough of a glimpse that they could give a description of who they had seen, and luckily, this description seemed to match very well with that of Mr. Prentice, what he had provided. So the police are now starting to think, these are linked. Now, at this point, police believe that this murderer who is on the loose could be someone who has killed many before the ones that they've identified. So what they do is they sent out plain-clothed officers to basically surveil the outside of old people's homes all throughout southwest London in the hopes that they could, number 1, prevent any further murders occurring and protect the elderly, and number 2, they just wanted to get this sick asshole. Now, just a week later, the murderer would strike again, but this time he struck outside of the Stockwell area. So where all the police were surveilling, he completely avoided this and went somewhere completely new and different for this killer, which made the police believe that they were very much aware of the police surveillance going on. So maybe they had went to try and break into an elderly home or an elderly person's house, but they had noticed the police surveilling the area. Now, it's also worth mentioning, at this point in time, the murderer was already being dubbed the Stockwell Strangler, and it's very likely that he's probably seen this. So he's thought, well, if you're calling me the Stockwell Strangler, I'm going to strike outside the Stockwell. Then what are you going to call me? Now, between the 6th and 9th of July, the murderer had crossed the River Thames into Greater London. He would go on to enter the home of an 82-year-old man. Now, this man was William Carman, and devastatingly, William Carman would be found dead in his bed by his own daughter. He was tucked up in bed, he had his covers pulled up to his chin, and he looked like he had just passed away peacefully in his sleep. But obviously, we know this isn't the case. Now, at William Carman's home, footprints would be found that matched footprints from the other crime scenes. So that's good, because now we know at least that these ones are linked. Not good that the murder even happened, obviously, but it's good that we now have a definitive link. And unfortunately, just like the other victims, William Carman had been strangled to death and sexually assaulted, and his flat had been completely ransacked, and around £400 to £500 had been stolen. Now, as the police are looking at these crimes, they come to the conclusion that the murderer in these cases could be someone who is suffering with a form of gerontophilia, which basically means someone who can only sexually climax by engaging in intercourse with an elderly person, and they're only really attracted to the elderly. Now, only 4 days later, on July the 12th, 75-year-old Trevor Thomas would be found dead in his home. Now, Trevor Thomas was actually found in his bathtub, which is very different to what we've seen prior with Erskine's crimes. And they believe that he had been in this bathtub for around 3 weeks before he had been found. Now, of course, with the number of weeks that Mr. Thomas's body had been in this bathtub, it had obviously started to very much decompose, and because of this, no forensic evidence could be gathered that would be able to be tested. Now, only 8 days later, on July the 21st, 74-year-old William Downes would be found by his son in his Overton estate, and he was deceased. The estate that Mr. Downes was found on was the same estate that Janet Cockett had lived in. This seemed to be the killer's favourite area to target the elderly. And as with the other victims, unfortunately, he was tucked up in bed, made to look like a natural cause death. He was naked, and disgustingly, there were semen stains found on his bed sheets, and further investigation would confirm that he had in fact been strangled to death and also sexually assaulted. Now, at this point, both police and press felt like they had no other option than to basically give out the details of these horrific attacks and murders and rapes that had been occurring to elderly people within the area. They didn't want to scare the elderly people, but they just wanted to warn them enough to take precautions, be vigilant. If you live alone, make sure your doors and windows are locked. And for family and friends that knew of an elderly person living on their own, make sure that they were checking in on them. Now, there was a helpline set up as well by the charity called Help the Aged. And this was basically a helpline where an elderly person could phone if they felt, in danger or lonely or scared. So that was a really great thing to have, because they could call even if they were maybe just scared, they had something on their mind, they wanted to talk, wanted someone to make them feel better, they could phone up for that purpose. And I honestly have to say, I think that helpline was such a great thing to be set up for the elderly, because there's a lot of elderly people out there who maybe don't have family, or they don't have family that they're close to, or I think even more likely to be the case is they wouldn't want their family to worry about them. So knowing that there's someone there that they can call 24/7, I think is amazing. And then on the 24th of July 1986, the Stockwell Strangler would claim his final victim. His final victim was Florence Tisdall. She also lived by herself. Now, Florence Tisdall, she lived alone in her ground floor apartment. She was partly deaf and also partly blind, and she really struggled to move around if she didn't have her walking frame with her. Now, Florence is totally someone I could get on with. It sounds like she was such a cat person, which is me to a T. She had 3 cats of her own, and she would also feed the strays in the street, which my little sister used to do all the time. She still does. The amount of cats we have that come to our door to be fed is kind of ridiculous, but I can totally relate to Florence in that way. Now, because she was feeding the stray cats in the street, she would often leave her windows open so the cats could come and go as freely as they wanted, and they could always come in to get some food if they were hungry. And I honestly, I just find it so horrible to think that, this elderly lady's doing something so sweet and, looking after these cats, and she really cares about them, and it's that one act of kindness that she's doing is going to be her biggest mistake. I just want to say as well that I'm in no way victim blaming. I feel like the statement I just said maybe sounds like that by saying it was her biggest mistake. I don't mean that. She's not making a mistake by leaving her window open. She's doing something really generous. And the only thing that caused her death here was Kenneth Erskine. This woman should be able to leave her window open at night if she wants. She should be able to leave her front door unlocked if she wants. But people like Kenneth Erskine exist. Now, Florence Tisdall would be found by the apartment block caretaker. He would regularly, check in on her, make sure she's okay, see if she wants a cup of tea, because he knew that she didn't, get around too well. So he would find her dead in her bed, and again, she had her covers pulled up to her chin. It looks like she was just tucked up, but this was done to hide the horrendous and sadistic murder and sex attack that was committed to Florence. Florence also had that signature bruising on her throat as well as broken ribs. Now, a small team of detectives had all been assigned to this mammoth task. They were going to have to go through thousands and thousands of records of burglars, thousands of burglars and rapists to see if they could get a potential match. They were manually going through the database and comparing the palm print and thumbprint that they were able to retrieve with the prints found in the database of these burglars and rapists. Now, incredibly, right, bearing in mind this is a small team doing this mammoth task that they're having to sift through thousands of records, incredibly, they're able to make a match with a criminal who is recorded in their system. Now, of course, these prints were linked back to 24-year-old Kenneth Erskine. That's right, he's 24. How the hell is a 24-year-old going out and committing these types of crimes? It's just unfathomable. Now, Kenneth was a known burglar, and he was also known to be a homeless drifter. That's how he's described. That's not how I'm describing him, but that's how he was known. So the police are trying to track him down, but they don't know what his current residence is because he just drifts around. So they can't find him right away. But what they do find out is that he collects unemployment every Monday. And police were also able to track down exactly where he would collect this unemployment. It was within southwest London, and the unemployment centre was called Keyworth House. Now, on the 28th of July 1986, the police were staking out at Keyworth House so they could catch Erskine. Now, as soon as Erskine arrived to collect his unemployment, the police swarmed him and he was immediately placed under arrest. Now, when he was arrested, he offered no resistance, he didn't struggle, and honestly, it went quite easily, so the police took him straight to Clapham Station. Now, Kenneth Erskine, he would not admit to murdering anyone, but he admitted to robbing people and going into their homes. And he said, you know what? Someone must have been following me when I was committing my robberies, and then they've went in after me and they've murdered the elderly people. Well, that would just be so coincidental, wouldn't it? When you're apparently robbing God knows how many people, there's always a murderer following you. Don't hear that much. Oh yeah, because it didn't happen. Now, Erskine also said to detectives that he didn't remember killing anyone, but I mean, he might have done it without knowing about it. Like, what's this guy playing at? Just say you're guilty. Now, multiple psychologists would interview Kenneth Erskine at length, and they uncovered the fact that he had the mental age of an 11-year-old, and apparently he was a bit of a fantasist, and if he was told stories, he would believe that these stories are about him personally. So like, if someone's like reading Spider-Man to him, like, bro thinks he's Spider-Man. You know? Now, at this time, the police, they believe that they have a strong case against Erskine. I mean, they've got this evidence. However, they're worried that despite the evidence that they've got, maybe it's not enough to convict him for all the murders. So they want to get some extra evidence together just to ensure he will not get off. So they put out 2 mugshots to the public, basically, through the media, and they get a call that they are particularly interested in. Out of all the hundreds that they get, this was the one that they needed. Now, 25-year-old Denise Keena had stated that she seen Kenneth Erskine on the night that he would have committed his final murder. She had seen him on Putney Bridge, and he was acting crazy. Now, it was around 11:30 p.m. at night. Obviously, if it's PM, Anna, what you saying? But it was like 11:30 at night, and she said that this man was behaving in a very terrifying and disturbing way. Now, at this point, Denise was so scared that she actually called the police to come and get this guy. However, when the police had turned up, Kenneth Erskine had fled the scene, as he always does. Denise said that Erskine looked like he was out of control, and he had the most disgusting, horrific, horrible, sadistic expression and grin on his face that she has ever seen. And low-key, when I hear this, it makes me think of the movie Smile, like wide-eyed, staring, this big grin, but there's no life behind it. Oof. Now, on January 12th, 1988, Kenneth Erskine's trial would begin, and he was charged with 7 counts of murder and 1 count of attempted murder, and the police do believe that he was probably the suspect in other murders as well, but unfortunately they never had sufficient enough evidence that they would be able to prove this. Now, he pled not guilty to all of his charges, but apparently he appeared really indifferent in court. Like, he never really knew the situation that he was in or what was going on around him. At this point, the court has witnessed some very concerning behaviour from Erskine. At one point, he just dozes off. Like, 1 minute he's alert, and then it's like he's asleep. Weird. And at another point, he was caught masturbating in the court. Sir, put it away. Now, the judge in his trial gave him a right talking to, so I'm just going to read word for word what the judge said. The judge told him, "I have no doubt that the horrific nature and number of your crimes requires that I should recommend a minimum sentence which you must serve. In all the charges except the attempted murder, I recommend to the Secretary of State that you serve a minimum of 40 years. I waste no further words in cataloguing the chilling horror of what you did. It is clear from the medical reports that from a very young age you treated others sadistically, and that your behaviour sexually and in other ways was grossly abnormal." Now, at the time when this sentencing had occurred, it was the longest sentence ever handed down by a judge in an English court. And when the judge had handed down his sentence, Erskine nearly burst into tears, and it's like, oh, boo-hoo. Like, you have killed so many people, you've sexually assaulted their dead bodies. Like, family members have to hear that, and you're crying because you're going to get 40 years, which, by the way, isn't even enough. Now, due to suffering from a mental disorder, Erskine would do the majority of his sentence at Broadmoor, which, if you're not familiar with Broadmoor, it is a maximum security psychiatric hospital in Crawthorne. It's the one where Peter Sutcliffe and Robert Maudsley would also go because they are also sadistic killing animals. Now, in 2016, Kenneth Erskine's risk status was downgraded. Now, because his risk status was downgraded, this meant that he could be transferred to a medium secure hospital facility unit type place. So he was transferred to Thornford Park Hospital in Thatcham. Now, it is actually speculated that Kenneth Erskine could be released within the next couple of years. I mean, I believe it's 2028 when he would first be up for release, and I believe he'll be like 65 years old. I could do the math with his date of birth, but I just don't care for him that much to do it, but I think he'll be 65. So I mean, if his treatment is deemed successful from the hospitals that he's been to, there is a possibility that he could be released back on our streets. I absolutely don't want to see that happen. No way. So my loves, that is the end of another true crime and makeup episode. I really hope you enjoyed this one. Enjoyed is always the wrong word, but I really hope you found it interesting. This was a case that I've not seen spoke about that much, I don't think. At least I've not. You've probably heard of it, but hopefully I was able to tell it in my way that you enjoy. If you do enjoy true crime and makeup, please don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. Put the notification bell on so you don't miss when I upload, which as you know is every Wednesday and Sunday, and I am hoping to increase it over time. If I can, you know, grow the audience, grow the channel, I would love to do this as much as I possibly can. Down below you will find my social media handles, my TikTok and Instagram, alongside my emails that you can email your case suggestions to, which by the way, thank you so much for everyone who has sent over emails to me. I am in the middle of replying to them, but I was kind of like overwhelmed with the amount that I got. But honestly, like, shout out to y'all, amazing. The cases that you're recommending, I'm like, I have never heard of these. So yeah, if I have great content coming out, I think it's because of you guys. If you're interested in any details that I've used on my face today, well, any product details that I've used on my face, you will find them linked down below as well if there's anything that you would like to check out. But I hope you're all having a lovely week so far. Stay safe, look after your elders, respect your elders, and don't be a bad person. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye!